We begin in South America with Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, who responded to the new sanctions imposed by the United States government and says that he is open to talk to President Donald Trump.
I am willing to talk to Donald Trump. I wish if we can arrange a face-to-face conversation between Donald Trump and Nicolás Maduro. Each U.S. sanction, besides being useless, is a medal for the revolutionaries, because it shows that we are brave and we are on the right path. The United States believe they can govern the world. They cannot. The world has changed. The empires are dying, and humanity is on the rise.
Earlier, Trump announced the sanctions during his speech at the United Nations General Assembly in New York City.
Today we are announcing additional sanctions against the repressive regime, targeting Maduro's inner circle and close advisors. We are grateful for all of the work the United Nations does around the world to help people build better lives.
After addressing the UN and meeting with Colombian President Iván Duque, Trump said his administration is looking closely at Venezuela. He said a military coup is possible.
It's a regime that, frankly, could be toppled very quickly by the military if the military decides to do that. And you saw how the military spread as soon as they heard a bomb go off way above their head. That military was running for cover. That's not good.
Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has denounced that his team was prevented from entering a meeting on Venezuelan migration organized by Colombian officials. He also referred to the relations between the two countries.
No estamos de acuerdo con que haya.
We have to always consider dialogue between Colombia and Venezuela as a sacred path, and nothing can disturb it, whatever happens. We disagree with what is happening in Colombia. We disagree with the fact there are 7 military bases of the United States in Colombia. And we disagree on the drug production that has increased in 31% between 2017 and 2018, according to UN reports.
Meanwhile, President Maduro announced a decree to legalize more than 8,000 migrants from different countries living in Venezuela. At a meeting with the Colombian community in Caracas, Maduro challenged President Trump to legalize all Latin Americans and Caribbean citizens living in the United States.
I publicly propose the U.S. government, if they are so much concerned about Latin American migrants, do the same as I have done, and sign a decree to grant every Latin American and Caribbean immigrant citizenship. Now I'll proceed to sign the decree to grant Venezuelan citizenship to 8,381 immigrants from different countries. I signed this decree to legalize and support world migration. Approved.
Addressing the UN Assembly, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said the youth of his country is ready to take the challenge of transforming Africa.
We are a young world where more than half the global population is under the age of 30 years. This is even more pronounced on our continent, Africa, where 2/3 of its people were not yet born when Nelson Mandela was released from 27 years of prison.
Bolivian President Evo Morales held a meeting with the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, as part of his participation in the 70th session of the General Assembly. At the meeting, the Secretary General ratified his support for the process unfolding in Bolivia. Morales and Guterres talked about Bolivia's role at the UN and the efforts of the Bolivian government and people in the social, economic, and political transformation of the country. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has said his country will respond to unilateral actions from the United States, which threaten the future of the Iranian nuclear deal. He added that the U.S. is invited to renegotiate if they don't like the standing agreement.
Ladies and gentlemen, unlawful unilateral sanctions in themselves constitute a form of economic terrorism and a breach of the right to development. The economic war that U.S. has initiated under the rubric of new sanctions not only targets the Iranian people, but also entails harmful repercussions for the people of other countries. We invite you to come back to the negotiating table you left if you dislike the Iran nuclear agreement because it is the legacy of your domestic political rivals. Then we invite you to come to the Security Council resolution.
And citizens reacted from Tehran and said Trump's measures against Iran are counterproductive.
What he said at the UN about supporting the Iranian nation is a sheer lie, because if it were really so, they would not have quit the JCPOA. The fact that he quit an international agreement, which the US government itself has seen before, showed that his word cannot be trusted. We are unable to trust them or hold talk with them.
The King of Jordan, Abdullah, spoke at the assembly in favor of international support for the work of the Palestine Liberation Organization.
We must continue to fully support and fund the United Nations Relief Agency and any other efforts to protect families from these communities and prepare young people for a productive future. It would be a mistake to leave the young people at the gates of radicalization and despair. Therefore, it is absolutely necessary that we provide economic support to ensure that the PRO fulfills work in accordance with the mandate of the United Nations. And above all, we must safeguard the heritage and peace of Jerusalem and sacred city for billions around the world.
More and more Venezuelan migrants are signing up for the return to the homeland plan. In the last few hours, a fourth flight from Peru has arrived in Caracas. It brought 93 Venezuelan citizens who say they suffered economic hardship and abuse abroad. The Venezuelan embassy in Lima says it has thousands more on the waiting list. Our correspondent Luis Tavera was standing by at the Simón Bolívar airport for their arrival in Maiquetía.
93 people who made the decision to voluntarily return to Venezuela through the Return to the Homeland Plan have arrived here in Caracas. The number of people who have returned has surpassed the 3,000, many of whom raised their voices with allegations of exploitations and xenophobia. This flight came from Peru, where in the embassy of that country there are more than 3,000 requests to return to Venezuela. This will be the third flight from Peru, which in total have brought back more than 400 Venezuelans, many who now realize the benefits that only exist in Venezuela.
That was Luis Tavera from Venezuela. And we spoke to these newest groups of Venezuelans to be repatriated as they were departing from Lima. This is what they had to say.
7 months ago, Luis Escalona arrived in the Peruvian capital in search of a better standard of life. Soon, his family came to Peru to join him. In the 3 jobs he had, he suffered abuse and was paid below the legal minimum wage.
In Venezuela, we at least have a house of our own, but here we have to work just to pay for rent.
There, you have free health and education.
Of course, for Venezuelans, education is very important. That is one thing that is expensive here.
Venezuelans who return home agree that the quality of education and health in Peru is much lower than what they were used to in their own country. After facing hunger, abuse, and hardship, they begin to value what they left behind.
We have been surviving, selling in the streets, and it was hard for me because of my health problems.
I couldn't find someone to take care of my children, and I didn't find a school for my oldest child.
I am missing our country a lot. When someone leaves, they don't know what it is to live abroad, and you miss Venezuela.
Almost 400 Venezuelans in Lima have already managed to return to their country through the Return to the Homeland Plan, promoted by the Bolivarian government. For this 4-plane load, priority was given to 31 clinical cases, 11 pregnant women, 24 children, and 17 family groups. However, the waiting list is long. So far, The Venezuelan embassy in Lima has more than 3,000 registered, waiting for a place to go back to their country.
It didn't go well for me. To be hungry here, I'd rather be in my country.
With all the crisis in my country, I would still rather be here.
The return to the homeland plan is being repeated in Argentina, Ecuador, Brazil, and Colombia, from where, every week, humanitarian flights of the Bolivarian government depart to support Venezuelans who want to return to their country.
Coming up, more stories. We'll be back. Welcome back. A letter written by Brazil's former president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was published on Twitter, in which he expressed support for Fernando Haddad in the next election. The letter was written from his detention at the police headquarters in Curitiba. Lula said, quote, "I wasn't allowed to be a candidate and to be once again next to the people, but Haddad represents me. I have total trust in him and he's going to make Brazil happy again with our vote." The presidential elections in Brazil will be held on October 7th. And with less than 2 weeks to go before this election, women in Brazil have organized a march in support of Haddad. On Tuesday, hundreds of women took to the streets in a march that promoted women participation in politics. The activities coincide with a campaign also happening during this weekend for women against right-wing candidate Jair Bolsonaro. They are denouncing his sexist comments towards women and leading a campaign on social media called Ele Não, which means not him. Haddad and his vice presidential candidate Manuela Dávila spoke at this event.
Since we arrived to power, the arrival of Lula represents also the arrival of women to power, because after he came, the first woman president. We have extraordinary advance to the point that today women are the majority in post-graduation programs and others such as medicine. What it means is that we are building a part of this agenda, but it is not everything. We know that we have more tasks to fulfill.
The president of Argentina's central bank, Luis Caputo, has resigned only a few months after being appointed. The government has confirmed he will be replaced by Guido Sandleris, current Deputy Minister of Finance. Meanwhile, President Mauricio Macri has been renegotiating the terms of a bailout with the International Monetary Fund as the peso keeps dropping. Public transport is almost at a complete standstill in Argentina on the second day of a general strike against the government's austerity policies. Trade unions marched through Buenos Aires. Let's hear from Edgardo Esteban with the latest.
As the trade unions announced at a news conference, this general strike has exceeded all expectations. It really expresses how angry the Argentinian people are with these economic policies that are being implemented. It's like a holiday here in Buenos Aires, with almost nothing moving. This avenue is usually buzzing with buses and traffic, but none are running today. No buses, no trains, no metro, and no flights out of the main airports. So it is an expression of the widespread wish for the government to change its policies, while President Macri is renegotiating the terms of his $50 billion bailout deal with the IMF. Today, he met Christine Lagarde to talk about this. But we also saw the resignation of the head of the central bank, Luis Caputo, who is very close to Macri, precisely on the day that the president is negotiating with the IMF. So this powerful strike also has an impact on those differences within the government. So it's been an important day in the crisis here in Argentina.
That was Edgardo Esteban from Buenos Aires. So let's take a look at how this latest strike began in Argentina.
Worker unions are striking for 36 hours to protest the austerity measures proposed by the government of Mauricio Macri. They have strongly condemned mass redundancies in various public sectors. They want the government to provide better salaries.
Our salaries are not enough. They are worth half of what they were worth 2 months ago. It's outrageous.
People are just finding a way to reach the end of the month. Layoffs haven't stopped. Our protests are repressed. We are living in a country we thought we left in the past.
Workers regret that the problem is getting worse day by day. Since the economic crisis started, there are 2 million people under the poverty line.
This strike and every protest will either aim at fighting the neoliberal project of the government.
This shows the tenacity of Argentinians. We will not give in to the austerity measures Macri is promoting along with the International Monetary Fund.
Workers and social movements also reject inflation, so public sector workers are making a stand by striking.
The strike is aimed at rejecting austerity measures, but also to visibilize the pain of every citizen that lost his job or can't afford basic goods.
Trains, buses, subways, and flights remain closed. Airlines announced that nearly 80,000 passengers canceled or rescheduled their flights. Banks and schools have also closed.
In Costa Rica, another day of dialogue between unions and the government concludes without an agreement for what workers say is a lack of political will to build a fair tax reform. As unions reach their 15th day of strikes, they say they're willing to continue. The National Trade Union Alliance reported that the government rejected 3 proposals presented during the deliberations and accused the government of trying to divide the movement. As a result, they summoned all Costa Rican people to participate in the different activities scheduled in the country, including the national march called March of the Four Cats for Wednesday, September 26. Relatives of the 43 missing Ayotzinapa students have demonstrated in Mexico City on the eve of the 4th anniversary of their disappearance. They were joined by students and activists who demanded justice. The victims' families have been highly critical of the way the government has handled the case. They believe the army could have been involved in the students' disappearance.
For us, as long as it is not scientifically proven that the young people have died, they are still alive, and that's how we want to find them. We have only come here to demand that the resolution given, in line with the law, be true, justice, and will stick to the law.
Human rights organizations in El Salvador are demanding accountability for the Mozote massacre, which took place more than 3 decades ago.
In December 1981, an army-led operation resulted in the massacre of about 1,000 men, women, and children in and around the rural hamlet of El Mozote. It happened at the beginning of the Salvadoran Civil War. The killings went unpunished because of an amnesty law, which was eventually lifted by the Supreme Court. Yet still, justice has been denied. This issue took center stage at the recent meeting held by Central American University and various human rights associations.
There have been already 43 witnesses. It is a huge massacre. I don't know when the judge is going to stop calling witnesses. The place where it happened has been thoroughly examined, and there will be possibly new exhumations at different locations.
The wounds are still fresh for survivors and victims' families.
11 people from my home died, plus about 50 other family members died too. In 1986, I went to Honduras. The scars were never closed. Those who ordered the daily attacks have never apologized to us.
In 1992, Argentine anthropologists exhumed remains, damning scientific evidence. It proved that the massacre was carried out by the Salvadoran army, acting on the state's orders.
They were defenseless children, and there was an explicit order by the armed forces to kill them all. History has to understand this. People need to understand and assume it, because otherwise it will happen again.
The justice system is supposed to punish criminal masterminds. Survivors and the victims of families are clinging to this hope. They say persons behind one of the worst massacres in modern Latin American history must not go unpunished.
We'll take one last short break, but stay with us. We'll be back after this short video. Welcome back. On the Gaza Strip, hundreds of people have held a protest against the U.S. ending its funding for the Palestinian refugees. Protests took place at the Jabalia refugee camp. Among the protesters were teachers and students who said that the cuts would affect the schools run by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. This comes after U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew all support for the UNRWA, which gives critical aid to 5 million Palestinian refugees.
This event takes place at the same time as the General Assembly of the United Nations in order to deliver a message that our Palestinian society is against all the American actions related to UNRWA and the attempt to liquidate it. Students, teachers and refugees have come here to say no, and any manipulations with UNRWA will be followed by great movements.
Hundreds attended the funeral of a Palestinian man killed by Israeli forces at the Gaza-Israel border. 21-year-old Mohammed Abu Sadek was shot by Israeli soldiers during protests on Monday. 10 other Palestinians were also wounded. At least 187 have been killed since the demonstrations of the Great March of Return began in March this year. Violence broke out at a protest organized by a group called the Western Cape Total Shutdown in Cape Town. A video, which was uploaded to social media, showed police firing stun grenades and water cannons at protesters. The demonstration was held against poverty, unemployment, corruption, violence, and crime in the city. South Africa is in need of faster economic growth to reduce its 27% unemployment rate and alleviate poverty and inequality, which are stoking instability ahead of national elections next year. A South Sudanese doctor has won the prestigious Nansen Award from the UN Refugee Agency. He runs a hospital without the adequate resources to perform surgeries, but despite this, the hospital performs approximately 60 surgeries per week, saving thousands of lives.
This award recognizes the extraordinary work of Dr. Attar in delivering medical services for the past 20 years to displaced people, as well as his profound humanity for those who have the chance to discuss with Dr. Attar. That brings very clearly, and his self-sacrifice.
Most of the problem will actually depend on peace in South Sudan, which is so important because it will bring an end to in South Sudan as well as in North Sudan. If peace is there, then there will be that possibility to get more people in the field of medicines. Also, the refugees will go back home, and the displaced also will also get their way back home. And then the number of doctors, of course, will also increase.
Nigerian troops have killed 14 Boko Haram fighters in an operation aimed at defeating the armed group in the northeastern region. The military said 146 hostages were also freed during the military operation in the Gwosa area in the northern state of Borno. Boko Haram has been trying since 2009 to establish an Islamic State in Nigeria, killing some 20,000 people and forcing displacement of millions. And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. But this and many other stories you can find on our website at telesurtv.net/English. Here you can find all our latest information on the region, on opinion articles as well, and you can search through countries, so be sure to check it out. You can also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.